Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. John McKechnie and Mario Puig here with you today. Today's focus, we are getting into the late rounds, going into some late strategy. We're going to be focusing on our favorite late round tight ends to target. And then in the later part of the show, we're going to get into some of Mario's other favorite late round targets, talking receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, and the like. So we're doing deep cuts today on this episode. Let's get it rolling. Welcome on into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast presented by our friends over at Circa, Fantrax, and Rival Fantasy. I'm your host, John McKechnie. That is Mario Puig. Today we're going a little bit deep into the weeds. We're not going to pretend like we are analyzing the first week of preseason games. We'll leave that to other podcasts. I don't know what's going to happen in those games. I know that I will watch them. I don't know if I'll have much in the way of takeaways, but they will just mostly be there for entertainment purposes only. And also, I will not bore the listeners with my terrible RotoWire Stake League auction draft from yesterday, but just a spoiler, it's bad. Our guy Jake Latarski always tweets out the projected standings once the auction wraps up. Not only am I in last place by the projections, I'm in last place by like at least one or two standard deviations. Like it's not looking good.
It goes into that level of detail. Oh wow,
yeah,
it's really putting you on blast there.
You know, I think it's deserved, and I know I may be undercutting myself as the host of this show to just lead it off saying how bad I drafted yesterday. But hey, I'm mostly a snake draft and best ball guy. The football auction, I only do one a year. It's only this one. There's no real way to prepare for that one. You've got coworkers that know the guys that you like and will bid you up just to do it. And I will return the favor with other people. I will be really mean when I have the hammer when I have $8 left and everyone's down to $1. But it's in the past now. I'm just going to have to really ratchet in my in-season management for that one.
Yeah, I don't do the stake league anymore because it's in my opinion, a toxic league where the horrible tech guys of RotoWire will if they're on the winning side anyway, will basically take your month's rent in desserts, and it's just a ridiculous culture there. So I stick to my safe underdog and like NFFC type stuff where I can stay away from my abusive coworkers.
When you walk into the tornado room in Madison and there's like a sort of like Roman vomitorium / like wine setup and all the tech guys are running around in there, it's like I'm in for a hurting. I'm gonna have to call my credit card company about this, and they're gonna be mad at me, and I'm gonna be mad at myself and also everyone else. But it is what it is, folks. But let's go ahead. Let's dig in. Let's lay some base parameters here. What late round tight end means for this particular episode. So I'm thinking that the cutoff will be Chig Okonkwo, a guy that we've talked about a lot earlier in this offseason. We haven't talked about a ton in light of the DeAndre Hopkins signing there in Tennessee. So he's going in the mid to late 12th round over on Underdog. Check out our promotion with Underdog. Get signed up over there, match your deposit, and you get a free RotoWire subscription on top of it. So check that out. But we'll start with Chig Okonkwo and just kind of work our way through the last 4 or 5 rounds of Underdog drafts, which obviously end after the 18th. So what is the state of the union, the state of the state, when it comes to our guy Chig, a guy who I have 42% exposure to?
I don't have quite that much, but I definitely have plenty of Okonkwo. He might be my most drafted tight end. It's got to be either him or someone else we'll be talking about later in the late round tight end segment. But to me, part of what always made it pretty easy to sell me on a Okonkwo was that the price was always pretty manageable. The whole reason I was buying so much Okonkwo was not so much that I was targeting him specifically. It certainly wasn't. I went into the draft, I got to get Okonkwo as my tight end one, but I just don't really like the tight end prices if I can't get someone between Kelsey in the first, of course, Pitts or Waller, and not just anywhere. I'm not going to reach for either one of them. So basically, in any draft that I didn't have a Kelsey pick or an ADP or later kind of spot to take Pitts, or I guess sometimes Evan Ingram too, especially if I'm going with like a Jag stack. Like those guys were the only tight ends I was interested in, and I'm not really reaching for any of them, So when I get to the 10th round or something, I might as well wait till the 12th or the 13th to take Okonkwo. I'm not gonna start bidding for tight ends in this range. I'm taking players at other positions, probably like running back, maybe quarterback, things like that. So Okonkwo was always not so much that I was specifically targeting him as much as taking him allowed me to build this broader structure that I liked, or I thought was the best I could work with in that given draft market anyway. So we're talking kind of not lowered expectations, but not outrageous ones. Like we don't need him to set the league on fire to do the part for us this year in fantasy. And I think that's still the case after the DeAndre Hopkins signing. A few things to keep in mind, of course. I mean, the Titans weren't going to throw that much anyway. They can't throw that much. They're going to run the ball as much as they can, of course, and as much as ever that's the case because their offensive line has 4 new starters. You're not going to be doing elaborate, bootleg stuff, maybe like goal line bootleg runs for Tannehill, but you're not going to be doing complex, deep drop, multi-blitz pickup setups with that much turnover on your offensive line. So, like, DeAndre Hopkins going there, of course, he's going to take up more of a target share than if it was Chris Moore running as the wide receiver 2 or whatever, or Westbrook-Ikhine. But there is only so much structural room for Hopkins to function there because him, Burks, and Okonkwo are already working from a sort of jumbo personnel look in the first place. So I think Hopkins is going to eat, of course, but you're basically splitting up the field into thirds, and Hopkins and Burks generally are not going to be running in the same areas as Okonkwo. So you're going to see not as a base function in the offense. You're not going to see like dropping back, throwing to Okonkwo every 6 snaps or something, but there is a sort of necessary role for him to play off of the threat because defenses will roll tons of safety help toward Hopkins if they go to if Hopkins has 6 catches in the first half, they're rolling coverage that way. And Titans want to get to as many as 30 pass attempts. They have to get Okonkwo involved. It's like Derrick Henry is probably a bigger threat to emerge as the 3rd leading pass catcher on that team than any receiver other than Hopkins or Burks. So I think between the low or modest anyway asking price on Okonkwo all offseason and especially now, and the fact that taking him usually means you're loading up pretty heavily at the other positions, I think the risk around him is a bit overstated at this point. Like he's risky if in the sense that, he can't get you 1,000 yards, but who in that range of the ADP could? Nobody.
No, I don't think so either. And he's just kind of, I think part of the reason why I've gone after him so much is he is the last of what I view to be, and I know it sounds rich given that, he's got 1 year of sample, didn't really do a whole lot in the first few weeks of the season last year. Really, you could argue that I'm holding on to what he did late in the year, but it does feel like him versus some of the other tight ends that go in that same range, like your Irv Smiths, your Gerald Everett's, Taysom Hills, and so on. I feel like Okonkwo, even if the track record isn't overly lengthy, I think that he's still someone that showed enough last year to where he's not disappearing from this offense. I felt that way coming into this offseason. I felt that way, or I feel that way even still, even with Hopkins in the fold. Hopkins might just kind of help the overall health of this passing game.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's going to be league average even, but it may not be plumb worst anymore as a result of Hopkins being in there. And I think your point's well taken when it comes to the offensive line being pretty significant question mark. Hopefully Tannehill still has a little bit of mobility left in the tank to extend some plays. But bottom line, I thought that what Chig showed last year at the end of the season was extremely encouraging. I thought that, as far as the athletic testing was concerned at the combine, I thought he stood out pretty nicely to the point where it's like, he doesn't get talked about as being toolsy. He's pretty toolsy.
He's literally faster than Trey Burks, and he's 10 pounds heavier, 15 pounds heavier. So it's an uncommon athletic category that Okonkwo resides in, and the idea that they have reason to go away from him is, like you said, just not true. Like they, if anything, kind of have more reason to believe they can use Okonkwo as a featured target than Burks even. And I like Burks. I think he's going to be just fine. But Okonkwo had 30 targets on his last 187 snaps last year, 187 snaps, 30 targets. That's the team saying, we need to get this guy the ball. And all he did was do well with it. So even if you project regression in Okonkwo's yards after the catch per catch is 8.1 yards after the catch per catch last year, of course, is a high figure, probably generally not sustainable, but Okonkwo projects as an above average yards after the catch guy anyway. Like he doesn't project to regress as much as any given tight end, which is how that mode of analysis always frames. Like any given tight end is likely to regress this. He's not that. So don't project as much regression. A, and B, even if you did project regression from 8.1 down to something more like league average 4.5 or something like that, he's still at 7.6 yards per target and above the team baseline for efficiency returns, which is generally an indicator that he can take on more volume and still remain above that baseline. So for how low the price is, the risk is just completely overstated, in my opinion.
I think it is too. And like, to your point on the yak regression, not that.
How did he do it, John? How did he use so much after the catch running, what is it, like a 4.51 or whatever at 240? How is maybe speed a factor in this, do you think?
It's like it's another point or a case in how people never seem to learn their lessons. I remember people were screeching about A.J. Brown regressing going into his second year, and obviously these are two very different players, but everyone was like, oh, well, he had so much yards after the catch on average. It's coming way down. It's all going to disappear. It's
flatten the details. Always flatten the details.
It's like, did you watch AJ? Do you think that a guy that size with that speed is going to get easier to tackle this year somehow?
When you make the macro sample so big that you can't see any, like you forget like airplane level view, like space level view. Clearly these players are all going to regress the same way. There's no distinguishing them. They all adhere to the same rules, no matter how different they are from case to case in all their traits.
Everyone's the same. Every running back's the same. Every tight end's the same. It's it just flatten it, make a fancy chart, tweet it out, and profit. Before we get on over to our next cluster of late round tight ends, we got a message from our friends over at Circa. Get ready for more millions guaranteed. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back and bigger than ever with 14 million in guaranteed prizes only at Circa Sports. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere. 2 ways to win and no rake. Play Circa Million, make 5 picks against the spread each week with 100% payback to the players. Grand finale winner takes home $1 million. Last place takes home a $100,000 booby prize. With quarterly and full season payouts, $6 million is guaranteed. Join Circa Survivor to select one team each week straight up with no repeat selections. If the team loses or ties, the entry is eliminated. Each team can only be picked once in a season. Go 20-0 or be the last person standing to win it all. $8 million guaranteed. $14 million in guaranteed prizes. Visit circa.com for details. We also got a message from our friends over at Blue Wire. And we are moving on. All right, so let's keep it rolling here. So again, Chigo Conquo kind of led this off as the cutoff for what constitutes a late round tight end. So now we're kind of getting into the tight end 2 range. Mario, I think one of the more confusing tight end depth charts to sort through, probably the most, I would say. Denver's close, but I think this one really does take the cake. I'm talking about the New Orleans Saints. They all seem to go in a very similar range, whether it's Juwan Johnson or Taysom Hill. Foster Moreau, of course, potentially being in that mix as well. What are we doing here?
It's kind of frustrating. They have a lot of depth, of course. One thing I'll quickly get out of the way: Jimmy Graham doesn't matter at all.
It's not happening. Okay,
they can cut him for basically nothing back, and if he were to make the team, he's still not going to play. I'm sorry, like they don't have the snaps for him. So, granted, it's pretty difficult, I think, to really project these guys, especially Taysom Hill, without knowing what the actual goals, ambitions are of the Saints offense, the Saints coaches, running the offense this year. Taysom Hill is one of those guys who I don't know how you determine what he's worth exactly. Like he requires so much novelty. He's like a wildcat player. I don't know if I really believe in that kind of stuff. He's had a lot of good plays, of course, certainly in fantasy. If he's getting a certain number of snaps, Taysom Hill will pay off in fantasy, especially since he goes pretty cheap in best ball anyway. I don't know how you're going to guess when he's going to have his actually good games, when he's going to get his 3 goal line touchdowns. Good luck guessing which of the 17 weeks that's going to happen versus the 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks where he's just getting like 3 carries for 14 yards or something like that. But I feel like they have a lot of good personnel for running a base offense, even like an up-tempo one. And I don't know how you get Taysom Hill involved in a base offense at all. Like, he doesn't play real tight end. He doesn't play real receiver. He doesn't play real running back. Just move him to running back is, I guess, what I think. Move him to running back and just dispense with these gimmicks, these like this euphemisms almost of like calling him a quarterback or a tight end or whatever. He's not. He's a running back who catches shotgun snaps. So obviously, I'm not like the biggest Taysom Hill fan. So at least when I have a receiver depth chart of Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, and then I got tight end room of Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, I kind of don't really want to use Hill myself because I think those guys, by using those guys, I don't tip my plays so easily. I don't. When I put Taysom Hill on the field, I'm alerting the whole defense, like, hey, watch this guy. And if I have Foster Moreau out there on the field with Juwan Johnson, we might be running the ball. We can certainly do it, but you don't know that. You certainly don't know for sure which way. Like if I do run the ball with this personnel, like it's not as likely as when I run it with Taysom Hill. You can't quite guess and gun for the same things. So I think keeping the offense more difficult to predict from play to play, situation to situation, that's something that minimizing Hill's playing time assists, and I think it's to the detriment of that to give him more playing time. So I've taken Hill a few times just because he's so cheap, and those spike weeks he's capable of are great, but I just don't. And also the running backs are a bit deeper, and they're showing like an interest in getting more running back personnel with looking so closely at Kareem Hunt. Like, why do you need all these running backs? Why do you need all these tight ends and receivers if you're going to give Taysom Hill any playing time at all? So that's what I can't really figure out, and I don't mean to suggest I have an answer, but one thing I do think is clear is Juwan Johnson's going a little too late now, especially in best ball. I don't have like high ceiling hopes in mind for Juwan Johnson because he's not going to play more than 40 snaps that often. Like Foster Moreau can definitely play, and Foster Moreau can play like real tight end, whereas Juwan Johnson's more like he's in that Dulcich, Dalton Kincaid category where he's not a real tight end. You put him on the field to kind of mess with the defense's personnel reaction and hope that you get a linebacker on him, and then you use him like a receiver who's getting covered by a linebacker. Like that's what you try to do with Juwan Johnson. And in that capacity, Juwan Johnson has been clearly very good. And the point of that is, even though he's not playing more than 35 snaps that often, he's also not blocking nearly as much per snap as the average tight end out there. Like he's getting, he probably needs like 75% as many snaps as any given starting tight end to get the same number of routes as them. So it's true, his ceiling is limited. Certainly the more Taysom Hill is involved, certainly the more Foster Moreau is involved, but he also functions enough like a receiver that it's not truly a zero-sum thing between the three of them.
I'm old enough to remember when Juwan Johnson was a 5-star wide receiver recruit.
Yeah, he's the Ricky Seals Jones who actually worked out.
Yeah.
I think it turned out to be a case of like Juwan Johnson just his traits didn't work as well for a 3-down role on the perimeter receiver role as much as like if you can get him going against safeties and linebackers, which he's just big enough to kind of make the defense respond that way, being like 6'4", 230 plus. Like you as a defensive coordinator don't really want to put a corner on him, so you put
right.
You're like, oh well, let's put our 230-pound linebacker on him, and that's just good enough of a matchup for Johnson to hurt them that way.
So I think Johnson is my Saints target among these later round tight ends, and yeah, I think with Taysom Hill, he will have at least 2 weeks this year, maybe 3, where he's enters your starting lineup. Like he has a couple rushing touchdowns, maybe even throws one. I think it could happen early in the year while Kamara is suspended, but I think that Hill is a fine enough best ball type of guy, and it's not like you're spending too much on him. I think I would advise to go with like a 3 tight end loadout for your draft if you're getting Taysom Hill, because it's going to be so risky more often than not. But I can see the case a little bit, but I think Juwan Johnson projects to be a little bit more consistent. I don't know if the ceiling's super high, but I think that if you're starting tight end, your tight end 1 is on a bye in a given week, like he's not going to give you like a frustrating goose egg. Like he should be able to give you at least a little something that ends up being useful. And did you have any lingering thoughts there when it comes to Foster Moreau? Any galaxy braining when it comes to his history, rapport with Carr, anything like that?
Well, Moreau is very athletic, but to this point, he's mostly just been a blocking tight end who sometimes peels off for a target in the flats after doing like a chip kind of thing on a pass play. So I, in a way, can imagine him doing more as a pass catcher. Just if he were of the caliber of pass catcher to displace someone like Juwan Johnson, I feel like Moreau would have shown more already to this point. He's good, but for fantasy specific purposes, I haven't seen him show that kind of pass catching acumen.
Okay, I've stayed away myself. He could play snaps, but I don't know if he's legitimately like fantasy viable. Let's go to a toss up next. We're talking. I'm pulling from my board from a best ball draft on Underdog this morning. The 13th round, the tight ends selected were Sam LaPorta, Gerald Everett, Irv Smith, Cole Kmet. Where are you?
LaPorta.
LaPorta of that grouping. And when it comes to him versus the rest, what kind of puts him over the top?
So I'm a little bit lower on Gerald every year. I'm a little bit lower on Gerald Everett than everybody else. I know that the target rate, the target count certainly is tempting, alluring, but a couple things. A lot of his playing time and usage occurred when Parham was off the field, and Parham has been, while he hasn't gotten big workloads at any point, he's always been effective. And you would also, I think, in a guy like Parham's case, project that he get more playing time pretty much every year, or at least until further notice. And I don't think that notice is issued yet, because he played wide receiver at I feel like, am I making up a college at Stetson or something like that?
Oh, that's real.
It's real. Okay. So, I don't know why that's the college that popped in my head. I think he must have played there, something like that I've never heard of before I heard of Donald Parham. And he was a really super productive receiver there. So he is a conversion project in the NFL at tight end. And it would make sense that he would start slower than he finishes, So with his returns on a per target basis being so good, especially, I think Parham could tap into the target share that Everett claimed last year, which also largely only occurred because of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams' injuries. So when you look at the baseline of the Chargers passing game last year, Gerald Everett is one of those, along with Josh Palmer, who was below baseline. They were dragging down the team baseline. And so if Donald Parham can come back and he being an above baseline return as a target, if he claims more targets, it would make a lot of sense, because to me, it looks like Everett's a little overexposed in his usage. Like he's the kind of guy who you can only go to when the defense isn't looking for him, basically. And if the defense starts looking for him, he turns into a big old turd. And so Donald Parham, I think, cuts off the upside that Everett is often the theorized upside with Everett being in such an otherwise productive offense. But he's always been a below baseline player. He was with the Rams. He's been with the Chargers too. He doesn't have it. I'm sorry. So by contrast, I think Cole Kmet is a really good tight end, but it might be more for real life than fantasy, especially now that they got DJ Moore. Claypool can't possibly be as bad as he was last year. I mean, my God, I hate that trade. I love that Poles made it because it's funny, but it's to be fair to Poles, like Claypool clearly just never got any traction at all last year. That'll change. So there's a lot of players who can take targets on a team that that doesn't have that many targets in the first place with the Bears. Whereas LaPorta, he's a really good prospect, and B, he is specifically a good prospect for pass catching purposes, for fantasy purposes. Like I was a big fan of LaPorta as a prospect, but I would not say, oh yeah, go put him in line and run all day. I think you got to get him as a lot of slot receiver looks, but he should be very good at it, just as he was at Iowa. He was their best pass catcher at Iowa on a team that couldn't throw the ball like 5 yards, and he carried that whole passing game over and over and over. And now Jameson Williams is suspended 6 games. If Marvin Jones so much as plays 20 snaps a game in those 6 weeks, LaPorta is going over 5 targets in all of them. Like Marvin Jones is completely toast. Khalif Raymond seems like he's got something, but they can't leave him on the field for like all base functions. He's just kind of too small, and they too often want him in the slot, where Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, cannot be moved. So I think LaPorta is entering this offense with a ton of slack in the first 6 weeks, and Jameson Williams is never going to be the kind of receiver who functions in the parts of the field where Goff is most comfortable. It's right. LaPorta, St. Brown, Gibbs. So LaPorta isn't exactly cheap anymore, and I know it's kind of it's a little bit nerve-wracking to go in on a tight end as a rookie who wasn't a first rounder anyway. I guess people are less afraid of Kincaid. I have no idea why. LaPorta, in my opinion, is the better player, and there's clearly more slack for him right now.
Yeah, I think so too. I've completely left Kincaid alone. I don't think I've even got one share of him. And
before the draft, he'd go in like the 16th and 18th, and I took a few there. But yeah, now you got to take him like the 11th or something. I was like, no way in hell.
Yeah, not doing that. And then, so I'm with you on LaPorta. I'm still ready to draft him at the new ADP. I'm comfortable with that. I definitely echo your sentiments with Everett. And I think also that offense is just going to look different this year. They actually have some semblance of wide receiver depth now with a trio of Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and of course Quentin Johnston. So, and a new offense in tow just generally. So Everett, I think if you drafted him last year, great. I think that's kind of going to be the high watermark for his career as far as fantasy production is concerned. And I think Parham, I haven't really heard a lot of people mention him as a potential threat to cutting off Everett's upside, but I think that's definitely worth noting as he continues to get more comfortable at this level, coming again, and I confirmed it from Stetson. Notably, Mario, we didn't mention Irv Smith there. I don't think we've mentioned Irv Smith this entire offseason. What is he exactly at this stage? Is it just Bengals tight end or like, he's going to be the starting tight end for the Bengals. That means Joe Burrow's his quarterback. They can't always throw it to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. So therefore, he might be somewhat useful.
Well, I'm intrigued. I just can't tell what exactly is going on. Like the Vikings just kind of got rid of him, and no one really went after him. Even the Bengals barely paid him to get Irv Smith to sign. And I was kind of puzzled by all of that. I thought, it's understandable enough why people sort of looked at him as a bust in Minnesota, but I think it's just kind of it's a mistake to do that. I think it's kind of between his injury troubles and how young he was when he came into the league. It's just not reasonable, in my opinion, to look at his sample in those years and just say like, oh, he's bad. Especially when, by the way, when they plugged in T.J. Hawkinson into the Minnesota offense, he had pretty much the exact same efficiency problems that Irv Smith did. They just kind of had to roll with it anyway because we can't bench the guy we just gave a second round pick to a division rival who's probably better than us. We can't do that, so we're gonna have to just roll with it and I guess cut Irv Smith. And Irv Smith is still just yesterday turned 25 actually. Him and Isaiah Spiller have the same birthday. I guess Spiller turned 22 yesterday. So Irv Smith is 25. There's a lot of second year NFL tight ends who are that age. And here he is going into his fifth year. So if he had played in the NFL instead at the ages of like last year and the next 3 years, people would point blank believe he was better than he was with the Vikings. And I know it was unfortunate for the Vikings, but it's at worst, I think, in my opinion, like a case of buying in too soon, basically. Like that's one of the risks of taking a really young prospect is if you don't have the discipline to play the long game with them, you could easily end up just getting disenchanted with them in their third or fourth year, let them go, and then the second team that picks them up is the one that reaps all the benefits of their abilities, and you just kind of paid to farm them.
Is that like an Eric Ebron-esque arc potentially then?
Well, Ebron went much earlier in the draft, right. And as much as I never liked Ebron very much and thought he was always overrated, he is a bit more toolsy than Smith. Like Smith is small, but not obviously fast either. And that's one of those that's a little tough to know for sure because he was so young when he did his athletic testing. But a 4.63 at 242, it doesn't, it's okay, but it's not really moving the needle. Whereas
more so like comparing the arc than like the players themselves. Ebron, of course, was really high first round pick and all that.
Yeah, I certainly see the parallel insofar as like it can't possibly get worse for Smith, and certainly it's I don't want to read into it too much. Sometimes training camp hype is just coaches saying non-binding statements to be polite that give praise on players, but they're saying good things about Irv Smith. Mitchell Wilcox definitely isn't a route runner. Drew Sample definitely isn't a route runner, but I can't tell if it's safe to assume that Smith will play as many snaps as Hayden Hurst did last year. I think Hayden Hurst is awful, but he's quite a bit bigger than Irv Smith and probably more capable of playing inline. So that Hayden Hurst play that happened so much last year where he sort of just blocks for a second and then runs off to the flats for a 4-yard catch. Smith can run that route a lot better. He'll do a lot more with those routes. What I don't know is if they'll put him on the field for as many snaps in the first place, especially if they see Sample as like a 30-snap player. I can't tell what they think of Smith. So I haven't been taking Smith in drafts. There's usually somebody who's got him identified as a sleeper who takes him quite a bit earlier than he would go a few months ago. But there's just other guys that I have too solidly ahead for me to be the one taking him, I guess.
Right. So, like you said, guys like LaPorta and Komet, I think stand out to me. Like if posed with having the
Juwan
option
Johnson
of picking those
too.
guys.
It's like Juwan Johnson versus Irv Smith is not close to me.
Guess where Juwan Johnson went in this draft this morning?
Sorry. On Underdog or something?
Yes.
Okay. He went in the 18th.
He went in the 18th. Crazy.
Yeah, he's going in the 18th and undrafted often at this point, which I'm sorry. he's gonna play 30 snaps a game, and that's all that he needs to pay off there.
I think so too. So yeah. Now the 18th round. It's you still have some decent tight ends available there. So I think it's important to make note of that, especially, and we'll get to this a little bit later in the show. But there are some positions that are basically non-existent once you get to the 18th. They've been picked over a little bit too much. Running back, I feel like it is definitely one of those. Quarterback, it's pretty dicey there as well. Sam Howell, interestingly went in the 18th round this morning in a draft that I was in. So that
Howell falls to the 18th all the time, but he's still like I did one today. He went to the 14th. It's like, guys, everyone should have to declare their Sam Howell intent. We should have to do like a blind bid at the start of the draft where we just like name it so I can get it out of the way and not get sniped when I get to the 15th thinking like, I guess I'll take a wide receiver 7 now, and then someone takes Howell the next pick, and I have to like rage quit.
Yep. The variance on
every
Howell
time I take a good quarterback 2, or an expensive quarterback 2, Howell goes undrafted every single time.
Why must we be tormented like this? Let's see here. But before we get on to a couple more, we'll fast forward past the 14th round. There aren't a lot of tight ends that tend to go there. We already talked about Taysom Hill. We're going to get to some later round guys and then move on to our last topic here. But got a couple messages from our sponsors here. Leading us off here is Fantrax. For you fantasy football players out there, is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or other features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules, or playoffs? Deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. I am currently in the RotoWire staff college football league. It's a slow draft, and let me put the emphasis on slow. But the interface is great, and all of the Fantrax part of it is great. It's just got to pick up the pace a little bit. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league. Invite your friends and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Coming from another service, not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your league's current settings and rosters and customize if needed. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Is there anything lacking in your current fantasy league manager? Fantrax likely has it. Fantrax is running a special promotion that you do not want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/rotowire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league, plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right. Tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. For my money, if I could pick one regular season game this year, that's Sunday nighter between the Ravens and the Jags in Jacksonville in December, week before Christmas. That would be it. I'd love that. I'd love to get there. So maybe, I don't know if I can win this contest even. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. And we've got a message from our friends over at Rival Fantasy. If you're looking for a place to play head-to-head fantasy football games without the huge tournaments, salary caps, or complicated game types, then Rival Fantasy is where you want to play this season, this NFL season, in fact. From a twist on a classic game with Fantasy Bingo, where players generate a lineup to complete achievements and get bingo, to head-to-head fantasy challenges, where you'll pick which of the two players will score more fantasy points. This is the best of fantasy sports. For the 2023 NFL season, Rival Fantasy is offering new users a $200 deposit match plus a $25 first play voucher. Rival Fantasy is so confident you'll love the experience. They're giving you money to play out of the gate. Experience the future of fantasy sports on Rival Fantasy and become a rival today. All right, Mario. We have mined pretty deeply into the tight end well, but I want to hit you with a couple more guys. again, interestingly, that Juwan Johnson was going in the 18th. Isaiah Likely went in the 18th in this draft I participated in earlier. I want to round it out, though, with two guys that stick out in my mind. That's Dawson Knox. I went in the late 15th earlier today in this one draft, and then Jake Ferguson in the 16th. Your thoughts on either of those guys as potential late round targets?
I'm pretty low on them, honestly. I think Knox before the Kincaid selection was kind of interesting, although even back then, I thought Knox tended to go too early. You sometimes see him going in like the 11th round and 12th round, stuff like that, as if he could do any better than the 587 and 9 touchdowns from 2021. He was pretty much the exact same player, maybe even arguably a little better actually last year, catching 48 for 517 and 6 touchdowns, and people called it a down year. But all that really changed was he had 3 fewer touchdowns, and it's by the way, he did that on 90 fewer snaps. So he, if anything, would have been due to improve a little bit. But yeah, he was kind of described as a down season, and then Kincaid gets there. And granted, I'm not taking Kincaid. I don't know what exactly the Bills plan to do with the two of them and everything else that they have on hand. But Kincaid is not there to block. Knox is going to have to block if they're on the field at the same time, and it's a pass play. You're not going to see that much. You're not going to see like a 4 wide sort of analogous function by having Knox and Kincaid and then 2 receivers run routes. Like that's just, you're being needlessly slow. It's like a selective shot kind of thing after you get the defense to respond with really big personnel and hopefully both safeties in the box and at least one. So it's a lot of situational stuff that for the price, just it was not interesting to me. And now with that said, Knox goes a lot later, and I've considered it a couple times. I have a couple other guys that we'll get into that we'll get to in a minute here that I prefer straight up, and they happen to go much later yet. Ferguson, though, I just don't really have any interest in. I think he's there pretty much to be a 6th lineman, and a lot like actually the Hayden Hurst role with the Bengals last year, but on a team that doesn't throw as much, and I think it's going to get more of a 3rd receiver role, I think, than in the Cincinnati case too. Like I think Michael Gallup, Brandon Cooks, CeeDee Lamb are all going to get a lot of work this year. I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 go over 1,000 yards. I'm positive that Lamb and Cooks will if they stay healthy, and I think Gallup could too. But part of that is it's like Ferguson might stay in to do a lot of chipping, a lot of check down stuff on the targets that he does get, which is just to say like he should have a high catch rate, but I don't know if he's going to get that many certainly not much volume opportunity, and I don't know about big play opportunity. Like he's going to have to do a lot after the catch, and he's not exactly a fast guy. He's more like kind of quick. So I like Ferguson as a real life player. I think he's a clear upgrade for the Cowboys over Dalton Schultz. But part of the reason why I think that is because he helps the run game, and he helps those other receivers. You're able to take more ambitious dropbacks with someone like Ferguson sticking around as a 6th lineman to neutralize the blitz. And then, if those 3 receivers don't get open, or if Pollard doesn't, or whoever, Ferguson's there basically to get 4 yards, 5 yards instead of a sack, So I think that's a good structure for an offense. I just don't really see the path for Ferguson to get catches really.
Okay. So, but in both Knox and Ferguson's cases, like the blocking responsibilities might, just kind of lead to a really, really thin margin for error. Like coming into last draft season, Knox was a pretty easy regression call. Like, the 9 touchdowns.
It's like Tunyon, it's like when a guy has like 10 touchdowns on 40 catches, like, yeah, he can do a great job next year, and he's still not going to get that return.
Yeah, you're chasing something that's just not going to come back the next year. That's just going to plexiglass the other way. I think I'm probably a little bit more interested in Ferguson, especially with him going slightly later, but he's not exactly like the end of the draft or undrafted guy that he was earlier in the offseason. But I'll have a little bit of optimism with him. I thought he was like a good pass catcher at Wisconsin, but I think to your point, Mario, like, they do have a lot of mouths to feed with those receivers. as long as they all stay upright. And Tony Pollard is going to be catching a lot of passes. So, there might just not end up not being that many targets to where it's just like Ferguson. He might be efficient on the targets he gets. It's just not going to be enough. And then you're just counting on touchdown luck. And that gets, a little bit tricky. Let's go ahead and flatten my hopes for this last one here before we move on to our next subject matter. I sort of halfway, and our guy DJ will appreciate this one. I forgot to pay attention when I was nominating a player, and Tyler Conklin was at the top of my queue, so he gets tossed out for $1. No bites. So I got stuck with Tyler Conklin. Can you make me feel better about it?
That was my stake league specialty, like being like, haha, some idiot will buy this guy. Like, yeah, me. $1. I needed a third or fourth tight end or whatever just happened. In our tiny bench in that league too is just like it's brutal when that one blows up on you, because you really needed that bench spot for like some backup running back or something. But yeah, I think Conklin's pretty interesting. He's getting, it seems like, more interest in drafts the past few weeks than he did certainly a couple months ago, and I get it. He played a lot of snaps the last 2 years. Like that's good to see. It means he's always an option to stay involved for the offense. Of course, they're not going to go to him as a first choice when there's Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, Mecole Hardman,
all the artists formerly known as the Packers.
Alan Lazard, that was the one I couldn't think of. Of course,
Randall Cobb,
his caddy, Rogers' caddy. So those guys, they're going to be involved for more base functions, I think, than Conklin. Again, Conklin is kind of that Jake Ferguson, Hayden Hurst in Cincinnati kind of role where he's largely there to just set the edge. And to the extent that he's involved as a pass catcher, it's usually kind of like we need to check down. Conklin does make some plays downfield, and I can't remember how good of an athlete he is, but he definitely was like one of the more active pass catchers in college football at Central Michigan. So the ability has always been there. Yeah, he's almost exactly like a Ferguson kind of athlete, a 4.8 flat 40. Good jumps, good agility, stuff that makes it really good to play off the edge as like a check down kind of guy. Like set a good chip block, maybe even get you 6 to 10 yards, mostly after the catch if the receivers can't get open. Like that's what Conklin gives them. So between playing so many snaps and having that regular function, like he's surprisingly consistent for a guy who doesn't really have too many spike weeks. But that's the issue for me. Is like I don't really see the spike weeks, and outside of PPR, especially, I don't really know how Conklin's going to be explosive. I would also say that some of his usage, both of the last 2 years, was somewhat a case of like the offense just developing a dependency. It's not the goal of your offense to get 87 targets to Tyler Conklin, especially if he's only going to catch 58 for 552 yards. In Minnesota, his last year too, is only 6.8 yards a target. So he just doesn't seem to have a downfield element, and I think with that it makes it that much more obvious that the Jets receivers will take up all that space, leaving him with maybe a good floor, but basically no ceiling to negotiate upward.
And this just kind of dawned on me as we were talking about Conklin, but CJ Uzomah was the bigger free agent signing for the Jets coming into last year. Any way that he somehow like resurfaces and kind of like starts to eat into Conklin's workload, or do some of my like old college fantasy football players I really liked, like Kenny Yeboah or Zach Kuntz, gonna do something here?
Jeremy Ruckert could. I feel like if I was building an offense and choosing from these tight ends, I would probably. I don't think I would take Conklin. I think I'd take Ruckert. But
he's a football player. Like he's lunch pail, total lunch pail guy.
He seems to have some athleticism, though. I don't think he could do any athletic testing because he was hurt before his draft. But Ruckert's one of those guys who he looks more athletic, or at least more functionally athletic, than certainly Conklin. Uzomah is actually a pretty crazy athlete. He's just sort of he might have that kind of crossbow problem where he he has like a buffering time in the first like 8 yards that makes it harder to get him targets than someone like Conklin, even though Conklin's not anywhere near as athletic as Uzama. But if I'm trying to strike 10 yards downfield, certainly Uzama's the one between the two, because he's like 6'6", 260 and runs like a 4.6 or something like that, whereas Conklin's a 4.8 at 255 and quite a bit shorter. So Uzama played 510 snaps last year. He was pretty regularly involved, but I think I don't know what his sin is, if he's the better blocker between the two or what. I don't know why they left him with less, but they definitely prioritized Conklin over him last year.
Yeah, so it's I don't know. I don't know if I'm leaving this one feeling a whole lot better about Conklin. I'm gonna be scouring the waiver wire for tight
He should
ends
give
here
you a
pretty
bunch
soon.
of like 8 and 12 point weeks.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
That's all I really need. But let's go ahead. Let's transition over to. We're going to be staying in this end of the pool, the player pool, but we're moving a little bit past just tight ends. Although of course we can still talk about them. But you're working on a piece detailing some of your favorite end of draft targets. So frame that for us. Is that 17th round, 18th round, or just strictly 18th?
Pick 200 and later.
Okay, so we're talking about the very tail end of your drafts over on Underdog. What's the lay of the land? What have been your kind of takeaways as far as like what positions are still there with guys with a little bit of juice, some that are just kind of totally empty out at that point? What's the landscape look like?
I think there's a few justifiable tight end targets in the 18th round, and for me, that list is Hunter Henry at 202.5, Luke Musgrave at 203.8, and Michael Mayer at 208.5. I'm not really taking him, but I'm kind of curious about it. I definitely think he's a really good prospect. Also, Isaiah Likely at 206.7 and Trey McBride at 206. So these are the guys who tend to go in this range if there is a tight end going in the 18th round. And to me, there's one clear target here, one that I'm taking a whole lot more than everybody else, and it's Trey McBride. And I can't tell what everyone is thinking about him. I think there's a general just lack of analysis about the Cardinals offense, because it's just kind of a dreary subject and no one wants to think about it, which I totally understand. But if you do think about it, I have to believe it's pretty obvious that McBride is going too late. Generally, I'll often take him actually in like the 16th round just to make sure no one's going to jump me for him in the 17th or 18th, because the target upside of McBride relative to all these other guys is just completely different categories. I don't even think McBride was that great of a prospect out of Colorado State, but think about it. We've got an offense where, yes, there's quarterback questions, but what do quarterbacks who struggle to throw downfield, which tends to be the case with most backups, certainly guys like Colt McCoy, Clayton Tune has a little bit more of a slinger attitude, but I don't think it's because he has like arm talent. He'll be throwing underneath plenty too. Check down quarterbacks have to check down to the tight end quite a bit. And when the wide receiver competition is so unproven as it is, and I like Marquise Brown, I think he's a good player. I think he's a horrible fit for this offense. I think that he will at once draw the most defensive attention, but won't be able to capitalize on the way that he would in an offense with more space, with more downfield striking ability. So I think on this team that has a horrible looking defense, might be the worst team in the NFL, they will be falling behind pretty regularly. And James Conner will stay involved, I'm sure. James Conner is awesome, but A, he's got a bit of a durability history, of course, and B, someone else has to catch targets. Your choices are Marquise Brown, the rookie Michael Wilson, and Rondale Moore. And I definitely think Moore and Brown are going to get plenty of targets, but McBride might be the one easiest to get the ball to. Like the defense is going to know, okay, Marquise Brown, he's really fast. Keep a safety over him. Rondale Moore, he's really fast. He's not going to run as far downfield, but have someone ready to jump that route, because they could go to him, and then that's a pain if they go to him. McBride should be relatively overlooked by defense. Defenses should just kind of almost want the Cardinals to throw it to McBride, because it's a lot of chain moving. You know, if the Cardinals are going to be losing, you as a defense don't mind if they get 8 catches for 80 yards to McBride because they're not scoring points. They're running out the clock for you. Whereas if you let Marquise Brown or Rondale Moore loose, you could all of a sudden, have the backdoor nightmare scenario happen to you. So McBride, I think, has an opening and a sort of welcoming almost from the way defenses are likely to respond to these receivers. And beyond that, McBride is a totally decent prospect. I thought he was kind of a weird pick for the Cardinals. I didn't think they needed him. But What do you know? I mean, just Zach Ertz. There's not just the ACL, but the MCL in late November. I don't know if Ertz is what's got people hung up about McBride, but look.
I think it's just the general sentiment of the Cardinals. I think it's just like, do I want to touch this even in the 18th
Fair enough. But especially in PPR, and I'm taking on McBride on underdog all the time too. Like Ertz is not really going to play this year. He's to the extent that he's active, it's going to be as like a mascot basically. He was already completely toast last year. Getting a late November ACL MCL, he's going to turn 33 in November. This is McBride's tight end position to run. And we already saw a look at the end of last year how this could go. He wasn't great or anything, but he had the 7 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown against the Falcons on 10 targets. He had 4 catches for 55 yards against the Broncos in Mile High 2 weeks before that. So he, as a guy who caught so many passes at Colorado State, and by the way, McBride, he's got the athletic profile pretty similar to someone like LaPorta. He was 6'4", 245, ran a 4.56 at the Colorado State Pro Day, so that's probably a little slower than LaPorta. But McBride can be less than LaPorta, and in this offense still be quite busy, in my opinion. So I'm taking a lot of McBride.
He's used to carrying a bad offense. I mean, that was the story of him at Colorado State that last year. Like they only threw it to him. Boy, that offense was depressed. Like Colorado State used to be so cool and fun. And whatever Steve Adazio did to them, he should be punished. And whatever Jay Norvell is trying to do over there, I'm not trusting that it's going to work either.
But yeah, so I didn't think McBride was that great of a prospect, but he's going to get a ton of check down targets on a team that's playing catch up a lot and can't throw to its receivers that well. So I think McBride is actually like the standout upside tight end after the 14th rounder. So Musgrave is also a good bet, I guess, as an early second rounder. I just am kind of skeptical that it's, whereas I think the Cardinals are going to have to throw to McBride a lot. The Packers have a few options all over the place, including, especially receiver, but even like Aaron Jones is a candidate to get like 400 or 500 yards receiving or something.
Yeah, well, good point there when it comes to potential Musgrave pitfall. Let's see, who else is catching your eye from pick 200 onward? Would you say?
Yeah, sticking with the Cardinals offense, I think Keontae Ingram is the number 2 running back on their depth chart, and I definitely even share the concerns about James Conner's durability. He plays a incredibly rugged style of running back, and he takes a lot of hits. So the injuries have piled up accordingly. They might continue to pile up. So we all kind of agree on that, or else Conner would be going more like the 4th or 5th round in fantasy instead of the 7th or 8th like he does. And it's so odd that in this fantasy media landscape where you see people just driving themselves mad with fan fiction that they write about backup running backs, fantasizing about the starter getting benched for this nobody prospect that we're all going to forget about in 4 months. And you see all of that around myriad backfields. How come there's no completely unhinged hype for Keontae Ingram as the clear backup to one of the most injury-prone starting running backs in the NFL? Like, do we think Corey Clement's going to play? I don't think he will. There's Clement's getting up there in age. He's always had durability troubles. He came into the NFL running a 4.67 40. I doubt it got any better since then. Keontae Ingram, meanwhile, is a pretty toolsy running back. And I know that people are going to look at his production from last year and say, like, look how bad it was. Like, he had like a quarter of his carries in like garbage time, short yardage and stuff like that. He wasn't there to play. And when they would put him on the field, it was like something was going wrong, or like it was a play that didn't matter or something like that. We know he's got ability with the ball because he showed it at both USC and Texas. And at 221 pounds, he can play a 3-down workload and take on the 3-down workload if Connor were to miss time. So if that were the case, you don't even need to convince yourself that Ingram's any good. If he's getting that level of usage, it doesn't matter. And there's unless we think Connor should go more in like the 5th or the 4th, that is very specifically a scenario we're all projecting in our minds, So even I have to make myself take more Ingram in the 18th. It's kind of a lottery ticket kind of thing. He's not going to play, if not much anyway, if Ingram's healthy. But like this TCU running back Mercado, he's not going to be in the NFL past October or something. Corey Clement could easily get cut. Tyson Williams, the Ravens ran out for every clown free agent in existence.
Oh dear, I remember that.
Yeah,
well.
So Ingram is one injury away from, bad offense or not, playing 40 snaps a game, and there's just no acknowledgement of that at all in the market right now.
Okay, that's an excellent call. That's one that had not been on my radar. I've done too many best ball drafts and have not even considered him yet. So all right, Ingram. Hopefully I'm going to get one of these drafts in while the audio is processing to get this podcast out. Let's talk about someone who I'm noticing in the streets is getting a little bit of hype, a little bit out of nowhere, but at the same time, the team context, the team situation. Kareem Hunt leaves this team's the facility on Wednesday with no contract in tow. With the Jonathan Taylor saga ongoing, is Evan Hull the one to go after it with your last pick lottery ticket?
He's got some ability, certainly as a pass catcher. He's very comfortable taking on things like that. The problem that I see is a couple things. Zach Moss will be back eventually. They're not going to put him on IR for the rest of the year. So he was probably the top backup to Taylor before Taylor's absence and before Zach Moss broke his arm or whatever. Yeah, broke his arm. So Moss, it hasn't showed up in the NFL so much, but he's a totally good pass catcher, and probably he might be one of their better options in the blitz pickup too. He's definitely got a sturdy build, has a lot of anchor to him, but he being hurt, of course, opens up a little bit more room for Hull. And the problem with that, though, is Deion Jackson as well. So Deion Jackson was the passing down specialist during Zach Moss's 4-week run as the starter last year. And he didn't, Deion Jackson didn't get a whole lot as a ball carrier. He got pretty much, scraps at most. But as a pass catcher, he was really good last year, actually. And he had 2 games, that one, week 18 against Houston, week 6 against Jacksonville. Went over 75 yards in both. Went over 70. At least 75 yards in both. 75 in one, 79 in the other. And he looked good doing it. You could see the difference between him and Moss's pass catching threats too. You could see whereas Moss would catch the ball and maybe even kind of crack his shoulder pads against the guy tackling pretty good for 4 or 5 yards. Deion Jackson would take that same flats target and turn the corner with it because Jackson has quite a bit more speed than Moss. So that play is a good one, and one that the Colts will need this year, especially because they just don't have any receiver depth at all. So if particularly if they don't have Taylor, not that I think they'll not have Taylor, but if they don't, there's going to be slack somewhere in that backfield, of course. And I think Jackson is kind of the first one up before Hull, because Hull is largely just the same applications as Jackson, but he's a rookie, and B, smaller and slower than Deion Jackson is. So Deion Jackson was not much of he was not a talked about prospect out of Duke, but he was always a totally viable NFL running back prospect. He was one of those guys who you say the production is mostly there at Duke, and the tools are definitely there. 5'11", 218, 4.42 pro day 40. So he's a little bit bigger than Hull, and I would say at least a step faster. So that's the problem for Hull, in my opinion. He would probably be good, but why would he see much usage if Jackson does all the same stuff, but is just a bigger and faster player?
I remember really liking Deion Jackson back at Duke college fantasy football. I always
was pretty
thought that
good.
He was super underrated. Duke football generally, kind of oddly enough, turns out some fun fantasy production. Unrelated to the NFL, of course, but Heisman dark horse, Riley Leonard. You heard it here. This is an NFL podcast, so I'll drop that now. But just take a nibble with some pizza money. I certainly am. But yeah, this is a learned backfield. You got a Northwestern guy, you got a Duke guy. All of this to say, we all know it's going to be Jake Funk, right?
Jake Funk is on the practice squad radar. He could still have his triumph yet, but needs a couple more broken arms, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
And one more player needlessly alienated by their owner.
Yeah, that guy, that Jim Irsay fella. So that was one guy that I wanted you to expound upon a little bit more, Evan Hull, because I'm starting to notice that he's getting drafted pretty much every time out now. So it was good.
You see people say matter of factly too that he's the next one up. No, look at who Deion Jackson is and try again.
Yep. Yeah. Good. There's value in actually looking into things. Sometimes it turns out, but I want to turn it over to you. Give me a couple other guys that are catching your eye here in the end game before we sign off.
Yeah, neither's exciting, obviously, but I think Mac Jones and Ryan Tannehill in the 18th round are kind of justifiable. I think Jones is going to be, in particular, a nice backup quarterback in best ball because I'm just kind of sure he's going to start over Bailey Zappi. I'm just willing to assume that. And B, unlike last year and more like his rookie year, I think Jones is going to be playing in really advantageous situations because that Patriots defense is going to be completely bonkers. And these scenarios from last year where they're trying to catch up and the pressure is getting to him, those days are gone. They do not have to rush ever again. And playing on a low stress on schedule offense in enemy territory often, I think is going to pay off for Jones. I think he's going to get a lot of touchdowns, even if the yardage is contained. And so I think he'll pay off there. There's more upside to be had, I think, at the receiver position. Receiver is generally where I'm picking in the last round. The running backs are such lottery tickets across the board, whereas the receivers, I think they have some lottery ticket upside, but they also give you some stat padding, some floor padding from week to week. And it's a long list. We talked about those Cardinals guys. Michael Wilson, I think, is still a totally fine 18th round pick. I think he's a good prospect, and he's of course unique for the body type. Otherwise, I'm going to race through. I guess I'm going to name my favorites here. Like Josh Downs is so it's ridiculous how overlooked this guy is, and believe me, if Jonathan Taylor is not playing, everyone's going to wish they had a lot of Josh Downs because there's going to be a hell of a lot of third and longs in that offense, and they're not going to be thriving in the downfield passing department with a rookie Anthony Richardson. I'm sorry, I love Richardson, but he's going to be throwing to Downs a lot if there's no Jonathan Taylor. Downs could catch 80 passes this year if Jonathan Taylor isn't playing for the Colts.
I know.
So I don't think that'll happen, but it could happen if it does happen. And so Downs is a staple target for me. Another one that I think just cannot hurt you and has a decent amount of upside, Terrace Marshall. I know there's some positive press for Jonathan Mingo the other day. I'm sorry. Chark and Marshall are their best downfield route runners. That's where Bryce Young is going to be able to throw most reliably, and everything underneath is going to Thielen. So I don't see it from Mingo. I do see it from Marshall. I don't think he can hurt you. Joshua Palmer is not going to be a top 3 receiver for the Chargers, but if Keenan Allen or Mike Williams were to miss any time, he's the first one up for either one. So I like him there. And an overlooked player is still Deontay Hardy, in my opinion. He can't give you upside. Granted, being 5'6", 170 or whatever he is, he's never going to play 40 snaps in a game for the Bills. But it's almost like a little bit like Juwan Johnson being called a tight end, and playing more like a receiver and therefore getting a lot more snaps or a lot more routes per snap and targets per snap than the comparables. Like Deontay Hardy goes onto the field as a wide receiver who is pretty much running a route every single time he's on the field. Like he's only getting 25, 30 snaps, but when he's out there, he is not blocking. There's a really good chance he's getting the ball. And at the very least, he's taking the safety down the field with him. And if the safety doesn't go fast enough, Josh Allen can make that throw, obviously. That's a specific element of the Bills' offense that's been missing. So much more than Kincaid, what I think will improve the Bills' offense, if it's to improve this year, is Deontay Hardy giving them an immense upgrade over Isaiah McKenzie as like the smallish slot type, and specifically a deep element. Like Stephon Diggs was their only deep element for the past few years. I know Gabe Davis would get a lot of those targets, but it's not his forte. It was like they were just, kind of forcing him to play that role out of a shortage of alternatives. Hardy is a guy who can get like 6 targets per 30 snaps, and he's a monster both after the catch and down the field. So I think he could be the third leading receiver on the Bills even. And I like Shakir too, but Hardy could get something like 600 yards on just like, I don't know, 450 snaps or something like that, because he'll be so busy as a route runner when he is on the field.
Yowza. Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to get me some of that. I've mostly kind of stayed away from the Bills passing game, other than Diggs.
More of a stack pick, by the way. If it's more, I like to take Hardy when I already have, or Shakir. Like sometimes I'll take Shakir and Hardy, not even a full Bills stack, but it's like if you for the price of a 17th and 18th round pick can get locked the Bills' 3rd and 4th receiver, I feel like that's one of those cornering opportunities that kind of makes sense.
For the price of a cup of coffee, you can also draft Puka Nacua every single day in the 18th round. I like doing that.
He's a durable asset. It's the kind of stuff you make your retirement investments out of.
Just yes, I got the diamond hands, baby. Mario, that was phenomenal. Really good breakdown on those tight ends and other late round targets to consider. But that's going to do it for us here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, big thanks to our sponsors over at Circa, over at Fantrax, and over at Rival, and of course our podcasting network, the Blue Wire network. That's going to do it for us here. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/try.